Good afternoon and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. If you're new to the channel, hello and welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. Today we are discussing 4 more cold cases that were recently solved with DNA evidence. But first, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Babbel. More on that in a minute, let's get into it. Number 1. Kim Bryant and Diana Hansen. Last August, we covered the case of Las Vegas teen Stephanie Isaacson, who had been murdered in a random attack while she was walking to school. Her case was solved after 32 years thanks to the generous donation that funded the advanced genetic genealogy testing that had been instrumental in solving the case. Her killer, Darren Roy Marchand, had committed suicide 9 years after the slaying. His DNA profile had also connected him to another unsolved cold case. He had been a long-time Las Vegas resident but had never been a suspect in either case. The generous donation had been provided by local businessman Justin Wu, who has since gone on to fund several more cases, and similar to the identification of Darren Roy Marchand, Wu's funding has closed 2 cold cases, both perpetrated by the same killer, and possibly another 5. Because of this donation, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department may have identified a serial killer active in the area in the 70s and 80s. The first case that was solved was that of Kim Bryant, a 16-year-old who was abducted from a Dairy Queen parking lot on January 26, 1979. The Dairy Queen was across the street from her high school, and she was waiting there for her boyfriend to pick her up. When he arrived, he noted that Kim was nowhere to be seen, but didn't think too much of it. Kim had been abducted around 9 a.m. and wasn't reported missing until late afternoon when she didn't return home from school. An extensive investigation of the teen was conducted, but there had been little to go on. Officers had one witness who said they saw Kim waiting and then saw 2 young males drive past, talk to her for a moment, and then drive away shouting obscenities at her. Those young men had never been identified, but officers had the make and model of the vehicle. Additionally, they also released a sketch to the media. A month after her disappearance, 3 boys made a grisly discovery while hiking. Kim's body was discovered in a desert area in a shallow grave. She had been brutally beaten, sexually assaulted, and the cause of her death was noted as blunt force trauma. The investigation went on for several months, but eventually, leads dried up and the case went cold. Throughout the years the case was re-examined. Law enforcement from the original investigation had preserved a DNA sample, and it was kept in storage for many years, but over time the sample began to degrade, making it more challenging to extract a full DNA profile using modern equipment. In 2021, while re-examining the evidence, they found a new sample on Kim's clothing and were able to get a full DNA profile and upload it into the national databases. This had renewed hopes of finding her killer, and it had been the first time they were able to get a full profile for comparison. Unfortunately, there were no hits. In 2021, after the success of finding Stephanie Isaacson's killer, Justin Wu offered to fund more cases, covering the costly expense of sending DNA samples to private labs in order to have an advanced genetic genealogy profile done. Kim's case would be one of those in the next round of cold cases to be sent off to Othram Labs. It took nearly a year, but finally Othram was able to narrow in on several close relatives of the suspect. In October 2021, LVMPD reached out to the closest relative and asked for a DNA sample to compare, and that relative agreed to submit their DNA for comparison. It was in November of 2021 they finally had an identification. Kim Bryant's killer had been Johnny Blake Peterson, who had been 19 at the time of Kim's murder. Johnny had also attended the same high school as Kim, but he'd graduated a few years before she did, and it was unclear if the two knew each other. Peterson had never been identified as a suspect, however he had been arrested for sexual assault but never convicted, and it appeared the case against him had been dropped. Peterson lived in Las Vegas his whole life. He worked in construction as a plasterer and a general contractor. He had married and had 2 children, but died under mysterious circumstances in 1993 at the age of 32. His cause of death could not be determined. When LVMPD uploaded Peterson's DNA into the national databases, they were surprised when his DNA matched another cold case from Las Vegas. On December 31st, 1983, 22-year-old Diana Hansen was abducted while jogging in western Las Vegas. Diana was a college student from Texas visiting family over the winter break. Similar to Kim's abduction, it had been quick without any witnesses. She'd been reported missing later that day, but maybe because of her age and that she wasn't a resident, or that it was New Year's Eve, there wasn't as large of an immediate sense of urgency with the investigation that we saw with Kim's. There is barely any information about her disappearance available. The following day, her body was discovered in another remote area near where she'd been abducted. She had been sexually assaulted, but in escalation of violence from Kim's murder, Diana had been stabbed to death. Diana's murder investigation quickly went cold. No one in the area had seen anything suspicious, and it wasn't clear exactly where Diana was jogging, so they couldn't even narrow down where they would be looking for an abduction site. There was little evidence to go on, and the case had remained unsolved for decades. It had only taken a week from Johnny Peterson's identification as Kim Bryant's killer for Diana's cold case to be solved. LVMPD is looking at 5 other cold cases that have similar patterns as Kim and Diana's cases. They believe Peterson could be linked to several more killings, with a wide time frame of 1975 to 1993, opening up the possibility that Peterson could have been a serial killer in the area. Christina Burlingham, Eve Provenzano, Terry Dietrich, and Mary Beth DeVito were all young women who had been abducted and murdered in the same window of time.
The sexual assaults and murders of 14-year-old Stephanie Isaacson, 16-year-old Kim Bryant, and 22-year-old Diana Hansen were all recently solved thanks to donor dollars, a private citizen giving money to Metro, a public agency, to pay for highly specialized DNA testing in cold cases.
The families have gone for 40 years wondering who killed their loved one.
Police discovered Kim Bryant and Diana Hansen had been killed by the same man, Johnny Blake Peterson, who died in 1993.
Certainly when you're going forth with the work, you don't know how it's going to pan out. This suspect may not be deceased, he may be living right next to you. So it's always worthy of a department's greatest effort in my opinion. And that bottom shelf that often gets put on, that's not where it belongs.
Lieutenant Sean Comiskey retired last year from Metro's cold case sex assault unit. He says a tough reality hides behind the recent successful solves. Units are understaffed.
For years, we've been working homicide cold cases with a team of 5 part-time investigators.
And underfunded.
And our focus right now is reducing violent crime. And we spend a significant amount of money on our current homicide investigations. So with that being said, we still have set aside our own dollars where we investigate our cold cases. The fact that we've had generous donations come in has allowed us to have money that we otherwise would not have.
Hola, buenos dias. I have always loved language learning, and I used to speak Spanish pretty decently, but over the years I haven't been as confident speaking it as I once was. That is where Babbel has come in and has been a game changer. You can select your own goals, which for me was improving my conversational Spanish, but you can also go with just the basics, academic, whatever your reason for learning a language is, they have you covered. And what I love about the app is that it is really challenging. It isn't about memorizing words, and it is truly immersing you in the language so you can leave your lesson feeling like you really accomplished something. I am also learning phrases that are actually helpful and aligned with my goals, and I'm really enjoying how the app has formatted the verb conjugations. It is functional learning, so it isn't just memorization, it is getting the content to that long-term memory, which is exactly where I want that knowledge stored. The lessons are made by real language teachers, and you can also join online classes with native language experts. The app offers multiple different ways to learn, which is super unique. There are the standard lessons, you can do the live classes, there are games, podcasts, and articles you can read. You can also customize your learning experience to whatever works for you. Babbel has so many languages to choose from. If you want to try it out, head to the link in the description box for 30% off a 6-month, year, or lifetime subscription and start learning today. Thanks again to Babbel for sponsoring this video. Number 2. Christy Ellen Bryant. On July 31, 1974, 22-year-old Christy Ellen Bryant had been working an overnight shift alone at a 7-Eleven store in National City, a city within the San Diego region. Christy was from Florida and had come to California to serve in the U.S. Marine Corps. An injury sustained in a car accident in 1972 had ended her military career. Christy was described as a very friendly person who was always willing to lend a hand where needed. Sometime in the early morning hours, Christy was attacked. Her body was found hours later when the next worker arrived and discovered the front doors to the convenience store were locked. He then discovered Christy's body covered in blood. Her cause of death was determined to have been several stab wounds, but based on the evidence, it appeared that Christy had put up one hell of a fight. They determined a significant amount of blood from her attacker at the scene. Despite an exhaustive investigation, no suspects were identified for nearly 5 decades. There had been no witnesses and nothing to aid in the investigation. In 2008, the suspect's DNA was uploaded to the national databases, but no leads were generated from that. In 2012, 2015, and 2016, detectives tested the DNA against all California's databases from their Department of Justice, hoping to get a familial match, but again, nothing came up. The case was passed on to San Diego's Cold Case Investigation Unit, and with the help of grant funding, they were able to submit the DNA for advanced genetic genealogy testing. In the fall of 2021, they identified a suspect, 69-year-old Carlin Edward Cornet. They surveilled him and collected a sample of DNA for comparison and were able to connect him to Christy's killer. Officers arrived at his home in Las Vegas and arrested him without incident. He was extradited to San Diego, where he has pleaded not guilty. Cornet had never been a suspect in the slaying, nor did he have any criminal history. At this time, it is unclear when his next trial date is. Christy's father and sister made a statement to the media. Her sister has vowed to attend every court date Cornet has. Holly Bryant stated to the media, "I do want him to pay for what he did, and I hope his family can accept it as well." Number 3. Natalie Shublin. On June 10, 1971, Raymond Shublin returned to his home in Bedford, Massachusetts. He noticed his wife, 54-year-old Natalie's car, wasn't parked in the driveway. He entered the home and noted immediately that something wasn't right. Unable to find his wife, he searched the home from top to bottom, and when he went down to the basement, he made the horrible discovery. Natalie was found with her legs bound, she had been gagged, and had multiple stab wounds, and had a significant trauma to her head. Raymond immediately called the police, who were able to arrive on the scene in minutes. A medical examiner determined that Natalie had been killed a short time from when she was discovered. Her husband was ruled out as a suspect. Detectives located her car that evening, which had been abandoned nearby. They noted that the car had been wiped down, but they were able to find several good fingerprints in the car. It was never clear why Natalie had been attacked. She'd been a housewife in the suburban area for most of her life. She had 2 adult children that had moved out from the home. The only thing taken was the car, which had been abandoned. Raymond was the president of a bank, but according to him, he couldn't think of anyone in his life or that he had encountered that would be a danger to himself or his family. In 1999, detectives uploaded the fingerprint into the then state-of-the-art FBI fingerprint database, AFIS. A thumbprint found in the car was matched to Arthur Louis Massai. Massai was interviewed by detectives who initially denied ever being to Bedford, but then later said he'd been asked to murder a banker's wife by an organized crime group. He said he turned down the job. Massai had a long criminal history, mostly dealing in bank fraud, armed robbery, and assaults. It may have been his incarceration that led to a lack of urgency in this case, we're not exactly sure. Massai was interviewed again in 2005, and this time he said that he knew who carried out the murder of Natalie Shublin, the woman he said he previously didn't know. He said he had been approached by a criminal organization and was told that a banker wanted his wife whacked and was willing to pay a large sum to have it done. He said that he declined the offer, but his cousin, who at this time was deceased, had carried out the contract. Bedford police want it to be clear that Raymond Shublin was never a suspect in his wife's death, nor has there ever been any evidence that has indicated he had been involved in a murder conspiracy to kill his wife. There's been no evidence that has ever supported Massey's claims. In 2019, detectives again re-examined the case and located a woman that had been connected to Massey's fraud crimes. She told detectives that Massey regularly carried a knife and that he had told her that he had killed someone with that knife. She also had information that had never been released to the public. Information she said had directly come from Massey. That, along with the other evidence collected that tied Massey to the murder of Natalie Shublin, was presented to a grand jury who agreed there was enough evidence to charge, and the now 76-year-old Arthur Massey was charged with murder on March 22, 2022. Massey has pled not guilty and his trial will go forward. At this point, law enforcement believes that Massey broke into the home and either Natalie returned while he was in the home or he hadn't been expecting Natalie at the time that he broke in for a robbery. It is unknown why he targeted the Shublin family, and it is unclear if Mr. Shublin's job at the bank had been the motive for the robbery.
She had been bound at the ankles, she was face down, she had been stabbed in both the left and right side of her chest, and the back of her head had suffered a terrible blow.
Prosecutors say police who responded to the scene realized Shublin's vehicle was missing from the home, and they found it less than half a mile away where they'd find a key clue.
It appeared that that vehicle had been wiped down for fingerprints. Police who responded to the scene were still able to recover latent prints from that vehicle. But for several decades, they were unable to match those prints.
Decades later, new FBI technology identified Massey as the source of a fingerprint found on Shublin's stolen car, according to prosecutors, who say when interviewed by investigators, Massey at one point blamed his cousin for the murder.
He claimed in his interview in 2005 that he had subsequently learned from his cousin that his cousin had in fact carried out the murder and gave police close detail of how this had allegedly come to pass.
In 2019, following my creation of the cold case unit in this office, we again focused on this case. Throughout 2020 and 2021, Massachusetts State Police troopers, as well as the Bedford detectives, carefully examined the case, gathered information about the defendant's past, and sought to identify additional witnesses. During the course of this wide-ranging investigation, the police were able to identify a woman who admitted that she had been involved with Massey in schemes to defraud banks during the 1990s. She told the police that Mr. Massey habitually carried a knife and that he had bragged to her that he had previously killed someone with a knife. That information, along with other facts developed during the investigation, was presented to the Middlesex grand jury, which returned that indictment for murder today. This situation, being able to go to a family over 50 years later and tell them that we have taken the first step in holding someone accountable, that we have kept our promise that we will never give up, is exactly what we envisioned when I created the cold case unit in 2019. Putting our resources into a case, meticulously examining every detail and seeing what else can be done. In this case, our investigators poured through old records, developed information, and this indictment today is truly the culmination of years of investigative work. I am truly grateful, as is the family, and they've asked me to express that gratitude to all of the law enforcement partners who worked tirelessly to ensure that we would get to this day. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Fong, then I'll be happy to take some questions, but I would note that in speaking to Mrs. Shublin's son and daughter, they have asked, obviously this comes as news that is both welcome and a great surprise, and they have asked that their privacy be respected.
Well, that is it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like the content and what I do over here, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. As always, if you could give a like if you enjoyed the content, that would be much appreciated. In the description box, you will also find links to channel membership or Patreon if you want to get more exclusive content or just support the channel. You will also find links to all my socials as well as other goodies. Thank you again to Babbel for sponsoring, and that is it for me. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you on the next one. Bye for now.